So welcome to another episode of Black Hat Python. In this one, we will be looking at the completed Netcat that we built out here from scratch using Python 3. So definitely stay tuned if that sounds interesting, and stick around to the end where we're actually going to demo this tool and show you its capabilities. What's up, guys? This is Ryan from Elevate Cyber. In the previous episode of Black Hat Python, what we did was, we did our imports and we built out the basic command line structure, right? Just sort of the outline of our Netcat program here. We're basically rewriting Netcat from the ground up, and we're actually giving it a little bit more functionality than the baseline Netcat in some regards. And of course, it is altogether slightly different program, but for the most part, the basic functionality is the same. Plus, it has this extra command part in it where you can actually execute commands without having to use some third-party binary, right? Like, we don't have to leverage bin bash or anything. We can do it from within the context of Python. So if you remember last time, we had these command line argument flags that we created here. And this argparse library, or module, I guess I should say, makes it very easy to do this. And this is code that you can take and apply it to any command line tool you make in the future. So that's what's neat about this. But I have a whole video on that, so I won't take too long there. Now, basically what we did is we built out all the functionality. So we built out all the functionality for these various arguments here. And let's sort of step through it. And I'll show you what we're dealing with here. So, of course, we have this execute function, and it's going to take in a parameter, which is a command, right? Because one of the flags is the ability to execute specified commands. So what you would do is you would actually pass in like a -e flag, and then you would follow that up with specifically what command you wanted to run. Now, we're running this on a Linux machine, so it's going to expect some kind of Linux command. Well, that data is what is going to be passed into this function as a command variable, and we're just going to do a strip on it. And if you remember from the last video, I sort of walked you through this, why we are using this, just to strip off white space before and after, just in case it's not formatted nicely. It'll format it for us, and then assign it to the output variable, and then return the decoded output, right? It's gonna actually send that command using the subprocess module, and whatever data it gets back, it's going to output that to us. Now, the big notable change from the last video to this video is we created this class called Netcat. Now, this class encapsulates all the different methods that we need in order to have a working Netcat program here. So there's a number of things that is. For one thing, we have an init function. So in Python, when you see this keyword here, self, it basically is the same thing as this, the keyword this, if you're familiar with JavaScript, some of those other languages that use the this keyword. It's basically the Python equivalent of that. In Python, we use self. And so all we're doing here is defining self.args and assigning it to args, right? So we're basically passing the data in and we're assigning it here. We're initializing it. Because if we look outside of this class here into the main function, one thing you'll see here, and this stuff is new here as well, is that we have this if statement here, and we say if args.listen, then let's initialize the buffer, and we'll have an empty buffer because we're just listening, right? We won't need anything in the buffer. And so args.listen is that would be like if we were running a listener, because that's one of the abilities we have. One of the arguments, we can set up a listener, just like Netcat when we do a -lvmp and we're listening on a certain port. Well, as we're replicating Netcat, and that's a core functionality, we have that in this program as well. So if we are using a listener, then we're going to have an empty buffer here. Now, if we're not using it as a listener, then we are going to see what is in the standard in, and we're going to assign that to the buffer variable. So that is what this logic is here. And then after we do that, we are going to pass some data into our Netcat class, right? We're going to pass in all the command line arguments, right, that were selected by the user. And we're actually going to send the buffer, but we're going to encode the buffer so that we can pass this data nicely across the network, okay? And then we are going to, we're assigning that to a variable NC, and then we're going to use the subprocess module to do a .run, to run the Netcat class here, right? And so that's how we're passing the data in. And so that's why we have this init function here that's going to initialize all of the important variables. It's going to even, create the socket, the connection, right? And all of the stuff that is needed there. And now these next functions are the ones that are really doing more of the heavy lifting than after it's initialized. So the first one here, we have a function called run, and it takes in a parameter of self, okay? And basically it's just seeing, are we running a listener or not, right? So if we are running a listener, then we're going to execute the self method, which we define down here, right? And if we're not running a listener, then we're going to run the send method, which we'll also get to, right now, really. And so within this self method, so if we're not running a listener, this is what gets run. And with this one, we are connecting to the socket, right? To the target IP address and the target port that we specified, right? And if there's anything in the buffer at all, right, then we will we'll send, and we'll do a try here, and here's where the loop takes place here. So it's going to set the receive length to 1 initially, and it's going to initialize the response to an empty string. And while there's a length, right, we're going to create a data variable, and we're going to receive 4096 bytes, and then set the receive length equal to length of the data. So the data is going to be this receive 4096. This is actually going to be the data in that we get, okay? And we're assigning it to that variable. And we're taking the length of that data and setting the variable equal to the length of the data, right? And then we're going to append to the response the data, the decoded data that we receive, right? And basically, we're going to keep doing this until there is no more data in. So basically, we're going to read all the data in and keep appending it to the response until there's no more data to process, okay? And if there is any data at all that is processed and added to the response variable, we're going to print it out to the console, and then we're actually going to append to the buffer. And whenever, we're going to, each time we're going to do a new line after each segment of data that we receive, right? And we're going to actually send that data off, and we're going to encode the buffer, right? And we're going to pretty much do this continuously until the user terminates it. Like, for example, doing a Control-C. And once they do that, it'll say the user terminated it. So this is kind of like your Netcat connection, right? When you have a Netcat, basically before, when you saw we had the client and server stuff going on, we connected to it. We could endlessly send data back and forth until we Control-C to terminate our way out of it. So that's basically what we're simulating here. Is endlessly going to be waiting for data to be sent from the client to the server here until the client terminates the connection, right? So that's the idea here. And so that's the send function, the send method, right? Now for the listen method, if we are running a listener, we are going to create a socket bind or the target IP and the port. And then we'll be able to support up to 5 connections at once, multi-threaded. So if you remember the server video we did, the TCP server, this is pretty much the same thing here. And all this code pretty much is the same from that, right? We're just listening continuously for a connection. And as soon as we do see a connection come in, we pick up that connection and spawn a new thread and start that thread so that it can listen for some other connections, up to 5 more, up to 5 total, rather, simultaneously, right? That's a multi-threaded aspect. That's the reason that we're importing threading up here. So pretty simple if you watch the other videos when it comes to the method, the listen method here. Now, this next one, this is where the bulk of the logic of this program lies. It's in this handle method here. And we're taking in self and client underscore socket. So each if statement or else if statement here corresponds to one of the flags here, right? Because remember, we have multiple different functionality we can support here through the different flags that are passed in. So, one is to execute. We have the execute flag, right? So it looks for the args because it's going to pass in the args, right? And if the arg is execute, right? If that exists, basically, this is a Boolean here. So if self.args.execute exists, meaning it was passed in, meaning the user specified that flag, then it's going to read the argument. It's going to execute it, right? Execute the command. This here is going to be the command, okay? So, for example, if the user passes in cat etc password, then this value here is equal to etc password, which means this would evaluate to true, and this would execute cat etc password and store the output into the variable output, and then it would send that off and encode it, and then the client would receive that, right? And so if it looks and there's nothing here, then the next thing it's going to look for to see if there's anything in self args upload, right? Did they pass in the flag for like a file upload? And if it does, then it's going to run this code here. It's going to initialize a file buffer, and then while true, it's going to receive the data, set it equal to the data variable, and if there's data that it did receive, then it will append that data to the file buffer variable, and then it's going to print the length of that file buffer. So the only thing it's going to print is not the contents of the file itself, but the length of the file, basically the data in the file, the length of the data. Let's just put it that way, right? And if it for some odd reason doesn't receive any data at all, then it's just going to terminate out of this while true here. And then what it's going to do is going to open a file as F, and it's going to write to the file. And then it's going to print off, well, not print off, but it's going to say save the file. That, there you go. It's going to print off this message here, save file, and then the name of the file that was passed in by the user. And then it's going to send it off and encode it. So it's going to, basically this message will be displayed to the client because it's sending that and encoding it. And now for the args.command, if that exists, then it's going to initialize the command buffer, and then it's going to drop into this while true here. And here's where you get your shell here, okay? This is like the full-blown shell that you might be familiar with if, say, you use Netcat to spawn like a bin bash shell or something of that nature. Basically, we're going to be sending in this so it kind of looks like a shell. And then it's going to be constantly looking for this new line character. So for example, you pass in a command and you press enter. Well, that's going to send in this new line character here. And it's going to see, the server here is going to see the new line passed in. and then it's going to consider the command finished, right? And it's going to add that into the buffer and then execute it, show you the decoded response. And if there's a response, then it's going to encode that, send it off to the client, and it's going to clear out the buffer again and keep waiting and listening for the next command until you terminate it. In which case, if you terminate it, then it's going to say that the server is killed, and it's going to close out the socket connection. So that is pretty much the entire program now. Now let's go ahead and demo it. If you stuck along to this far in the video. So let's see here. There's a number of things that we can do. Let's go ahead and start off with just viewing the help, because that's something that we can do with this program, right? So if we say netcat.py --help, let me make this a little bit larger for you guys, and I'll make it larger here as well, since I know this is a bit smaller. There we go. So what we have is you basically like your run-of-the-mill help thing when it comes to command line tools. So if you see how professional this looks, right? It looks like any legitimate command line tool here. We have a full-blown command line tool, and they made it very easy to create it using the argparse module. So now we see where some of these things come into place. Like, for example, this description that I was kind of unsure of what it was, that's just what appears here. This is the description section, right? And this just makes it very easy to create really elegant looking, standardized command line tooling, right? And you see easily all of the stuff here, even the examples that we added here with this epilogue. So now we know what the epilogue is. That's like your example, like your example text down here. So now you can really see, if you were unsure of any part of the code, you can see how a lot of this stuff is actually working. So first things first, let's go ahead and test out this command shell that we have going on here. So let's just fire this up. So Python 3 netcat.py -t for target. For the sake of these examples, we'll just use the localhost 127.0.0.1, and we'll use port 1234. Now we need the -l flag to tell it to fire it up as a listener, and -c, remember, is the command shell. So, oops, looks like I missed the -p flag here to specify that this is a port, and then I will open this up here. We'll use Netcat to connect to this. So 127.0.0.1, port 1234, and there you go. As you see, it's putting this little thing here, and I can even say, hey, who am I? Callie. Okay, where am I located? I'm here. LS. I can do whatever I want to do, right? Cat etc password. And I can keep endlessly submitting commands until I cancel out of this with like a Control-C. Or if I think if I type quit, it'll actually say server killed, because I typed in quit there. So however we want to do it, we can do it. And yeah, that's that functionality. Pretty neat, right? The reason it was appending for each line, it was appending that, what is it? The number sign, and this is that, let me search up here. I'll show you. The line that's doing that is because we're doing a client socket.send, and we're doing this each time in this while true loop here. So yeah, that's that part. So the next thing we can test here, I'll show you, is if we want to run a simple -e flag this time, which, remember, -c was the command shell, but we can also execute just singular commands, right? We can execute specified commands, whatever we specify. So let's try that functionality instead here. So instead of a -c, we'll do a -e, and then we'll say equals, and then whatever command we want to run. So for example, one thing that we could do is cat the etc password file. And so what it does when we do it like this is it just starts it as a listener. You don't see it here, but as soon as you connect to the local host on port 1234, you will see the output of this command. So let me clear this out here. And so as soon as I connect to this, I should see the output of etc password. And I do. So yeah, so that's how this works. And yeah, so it looks like the functionality is working pretty much the way that we would intend for it to. So I thought this was a pretty cool little exercise here. And it's just a kind of thing that's good to know. I mean, you could be in some fringe case scenario where for whatever reason you don't have access to Netcat, like Netcat's not on the system, and you're having trouble getting Netcat on the box for whatever reason, like to even install it or anything like that, but you have access to Python. Well, this could be the easiest way, if you know how to do it this way, to get your shell on the system, is just, creating this Python file here and executing it. It's a pretty fringe case scenario, but I'm sure there are some pretty practical scenarios where this would be useful. And even if it's not, this was certainly, I know for me, a good learning process to go through this code and write this code and then break it down to understand what's happening. And hopefully you guys were able to follow along as well. If you enjoyed this video and you watched to this point, be sure to subscribe. I mean, if you haven't already, I mean, you got to help get this message out there. Hit the like button as well. And I know a lot of people are interested in Python, and it's certainly something to help you on OSCP. So let's spread the word, get this video out there. And if you're interested in learning more Python for security, go ahead and check out what you need to know for OSCP, or maybe one of those Python videos, the other ones in this playlist. And I will see you guys right over in those videos. Thanks for watching.